The Democratic whip.
Are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor to make a unanimous consent request. That is a process in the Senate where we agree on things because no one disagrees. Unanimous consent. I've made this request before. Senator Grassley, who is my colleague and friend from the state of Iowa, different political party, but occasionally we do agree. He has a different point of view, and he is likely to object. But I'll keep my fingers crossed that my speech will be so convincing that perhaps he'll change his mind. We'll see. But what we're basically discussing on the floor at this point is whether or not, if the court issues an order, a public official has to follow the order. It's pretty basic. It gets down to the daily routine of courtrooms across the nation, and now it has more meaning because there's a question as to whether this new president, President Trump, is going to follow a court order if it's handed down by a court. So my unanimous consent request is one on basic principle as to whether or not people, elected officials, are required to follow court orders. And I'd like to make a statement in support of what I'm offering. So I've come to the floor several times in recent weeks to speak about unacceptable attacks on the federal judiciary, the federal courts, by President Trump and his allies. These attacks are not only wrong, but dangerous. It's posing a serious threat to our constitutional order. I'm sorry to say that the attacks on our judges and our judiciary have not stopped as I've made these requests on the floor. Instead, they have grown worse. Last week, President Trump himself called for the impeachment of a federal judge simply because the judge ruled against the Trump administration. The president's MAGA loyalists were quick to pile on when he did that. Elon Musk has demanded the impeachment of federal judges dozens of times, and House Republicans rushed to introduce articles of impeachment in the House. In response to this unprecedented attack on the federal judiciary, Chief Justice Roberts on the Supreme Court issued a rare statement. It reads, and I quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it's been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. Yet this relentless campaign against the judiciary has continued. On Friday, President Trump issued a wild rant that read in part, and I quote, this is the president, "Unlawful nationwide injunctions by radical left judges could very well lead to the destruction of our country." Quote, "These people are lunatics," close quote, the president's tweet read. There's been a lot of debate about when we will cross the threshold into a genuine constitutional crisis. I pray that it will never happen, but it will come down to a basic principle. The question is not when we're going to face this, it's whether we can afford to hold our breath and wait to see if the president will formally announce he will defy a court order. We must respond to the dangerous attacks on our courts and judges now. The Senate must speak with one voice, Republicans and Democrats, in defense of the judiciary, the separation of powers, the Constitution, and the country we love. This cannot and should not be a partisan issue. Last month, my colleague Senator Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, admonished 2 Trump nominees who suggested in our hearing at the Judiciary Committee the executive branch can ignore court orders. Senator Kennedy said, and I quote, "Don't ever, ever take the position that you're not going to follow the order of a federal court, ever. Now, you can disagree with it. Within the bounds of legal ethics, you can criticize it. You can appeal it, or you can resign," end of quote. Earlier this month, Senator Cornyn, Republican of Texas, said, and I quote, "You don't impeach judges who make decisions you disagree with. That happens all the time. What you do is appeal, and if you're right, then you're going to win on appeal," end of quote. These words by my Republican colleagues demonstrate an understanding of checks and balances and our Constitution. Some have argued that impeachment of judges is necessary because of the number of injunctions issued against President Trump compared to other presidents. They claim this is evidence that federal judges are biased against President Trump. I would suggest there's a more obvious explanation. The number of injunctions issued against the first and second Trump's administrations is evidence of a president who has repeatedly violated the law. I also want to respond to the baseless claims from, of all people, unelected Elon Musk and other MAGA allies that the most recent judge to be targeted by President Trump is some sort of radical ideologue. Let's be clear. Judge Boasberg is no partisan. He was actually appointed to the Superior Court of District Columbia by a Republican president, George W. Bush. As a D.C. District Court judge, Judge Boasberg has issued many rulings that clearly illustrate impartiality. For example, he was the judge who ordered the release of thousands of Hillary Clinton's emails, and his decisions have favored President Trump's interests on several occasions. Other judges who have ruled against the Trump administration were appointed by Republican presidents, including some who were appointed by President Trump himself. He's not always going to win in court, but he seems to think he should. As Chief Justice Roberts said in 2018 in response to an earlier attack on the judiciary by the same president, President Trump, he said, quote, "We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them." Unfortunately, leading Republicans, including Secretary Rubio and Elon Musk, have aligned themselves with the likes of El Salvador's Nayib Bukele, a foreign dictator in El Salvador who destroyed judicial independence in his own country and now is attempting to interfere in our internal affairs. Musk went so far as to endorse Bukele's false claim that, quote, "the U.S. is facing a judicial coup." Fortunately, the American people know better. A recent Washington Post poll found an overwhelming majority of Americans believe President Trump must follow federal court orders, including 79% of Republicans who agree with that. With strong bipartisan support, America knows no president is above the law, and the danger posed by the Trump administration attack on the judiciary is not abstract. The recent invective by the president and his allies has resulted in increased threats to the lives of judges and their families. That is absolutely unacceptable. Our judges should not fear for their lives and those of their loved ones because of their work. And if judges feel compelled to decide cases in favor of the president to avoid his wrath, we will no longer have an independent judiciary. We can debate the value of nationwide injunctions and the merits of any particular judicial decision. But violence or threats of violence, whether from the right or the left of the political spectrum, are never, never acceptable. In December of 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, a month before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln submitted his second annual address to Congress. It was read aloud by the Secretary of the Senate. It included these famous words, and I quote, "We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth," end of quote. America retains this last best hope of earth for democracy and for freedom, for liberty and justice. It is up to both political parties to protect it. We have sworn to uphold and defend this Constitution. Now we're going to be tested. And an independent judiciary has nobly saved our nation many times throughout history. It's a critical pillar holding up our constitutional order. As Chief Justice Marshall famously declared, it is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is, end of quote. And it is the duty of Congress to support the judicial branch against unwarranted attacks by the executive. For that reason, the resolution I offer today affirms that the Senate supports the rule of law, the judicial branch, and the Constitution. And so, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the consideration of S.Res. 136, affirming the rule of law and the legitimacy of judicial review, which is at the desk. Further, I ask the resolution be agreed to and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.